Clara Whitmore threw her whole body in front of that horse and did not move. The animal reared back. The stranger on its back cursed and yanked the reins hard, nearly thrown from the saddle. Rain hammered the road. Lightning split the sky. And Clara stood in the mud with both arms stretched wide, blocking the path like a woman who had already decided she was willing to die right there. "You turn back right now," she shouted over the thunder, "or that river's going to swallow you whole." If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Every comment means the world to us, and your support keeps these stories alive. The horse did not stop right away. It twisted sideways hooves, churning in the mud, and the man in the saddle fought for control with the kind of grip that said he was not accustomed to losing it. Clara held her ground. She had learned a long time ago that flinching was the most dangerous thing a person could do in front of something that outweighed them by 1,000 pounds, and she applied that same principle now to the man staring down at her from the saddle, with an expression caught somewhere between fury and shock. "Woman," he said, and his voice had the low, controlled edge of someone who did not raise it often because he rarely needed to get out of the road. "No, sir," Clara said. He stared at her. The rain was coming down hard enough that the lantern swinging from his saddlebag threw wild, lurching shadows across both their faces. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat that cost more than Clara earned in 3 months. His hat was soaked clean through. He had the look of a man who had spent a great deal of his life being listened to without having to ask twice. "I will not ask again," he said. "And I will not move," she said. "Not until you hear what I have to say. After that, you can ride wherever you please." Something shifted in his jaw. Not anger exactly, more like recalibration. He pulled the horse to a full stop and looked at her the way a man looks at something he cannot immediately categorize. And Clara recognized that look because she had seen a version of it her whole life. People were always trying to figure out what to make of her. The size of her body confused them. It did not match the picture they carried in their heads of what a capable woman was supposed to look like. So they stared, and they calculated, and they usually landed somewhere dismissive. This man was not quite there yet. She would use that. "The bridge is gone," she said. "Blackwater Creek Bridge. The one a half-mile ahead of you on this road. It came down tonight. I heard it go. You ride another half-mile in this rain, and you ride straight into the river." He did not speak for a moment. "You heard it," he said finally. "Yes. In this storm." "The crack of old timber failing sounds different from thunder," Clara said. "I have been listening to both my whole life. My father built wagon roads. I know what the wilderness sounds like when something breaks inside it." He looked at her for a long moment. The rain ran down the brim of his hat in a steady curtain. His horse shifted weight under him, uneasy with the storm, and he steadied it with a small movement of his knee that Clara noticed because it was the movement of someone who rode a great deal and thought very little about doing it. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara Whitmore." "Nathan Caldwell," he said, and touched the brim of his hat in the briefest acknowledgement. "I am trying to reach the Caldwell Ranch tonight." "The Caldwell Ranch sits on the north side of Blackwater Creek," Clara said. "There is no crossing on this road tonight, but there is a pass through the eastern ridge about 3 miles back. Takes longer. It is passable in rain if you know where the trail softens. I can tell you how to find it, or I can ride ahead if you do not trust directions given in the dark." How was quiet again. She had learned to read the quality of men's silences, and his was not contemptuous. It was the silence of a man turning information over carefully, which was rarer than it should have been. "You would ride 3 miles out of your way," he said, "in this storm for a stranger." "I would ride 3 miles out of my way," she said, "to keep a man from drowning in a river he did not know was there. Whether you are a stranger does not enter into it." Something moved across his face that she could not name. He reached up and adjusted his hat against the rain, a small, unconscious gesture, and looked down the road toward where the bridge should have been. "Lead on, Miss Whitmore," he said. Clara turned her wagon around. She did not feel proud of herself for standing in the road. She felt cold and wet and tired, and she wanted to get home to the small room she rented at the back of the Hatch property and peel off her soaked boots and sleep. But she had heard that bridge go down 40 minutes ago, and she had known immediately that she could not simply continue home as though she had not heard it. That was not a choice she was capable of making. Her father had raised her to understand that the wilderness did not care about your convenience. It did not care about your schedule, or your plans, or how tired you were. It simply did what it did, and the only people who survived it long-term were the ones who paid attention. So she had turned the wagon around in the dark and the rain, and she had waited on the road, and she had stood in front of Nathan Caldwell's horse when he appeared through the storm. She had not known his name. She had not known anything about him except that he was riding towards something that would kill him, and that she was the only person in a position to stop it. The pass through the eastern ridge was narrow, and the footing was poor, and Clara kept her lantern held out to the side so the man riding behind her could see where the trail was solid. She knew every soft spot on this route. She had ridden it with her father when she was 12 years old, mapping it against the possibility that the lower roads would wash out. Her father had believed in knowing the alternate route before you needed it, and he had passed that belief on to her, along with a working knowledge of timber strength river behavior trail drainage and the particular shade of sky that meant the storm was not finished yet. She glanced back once to make sure Nathan Caldwell was still with her. He was. He rode with his head up and his eyes forward, not complaining about the mud or the pace or the rain, which Clara noted and filed away without comment. They reached the north side of the creek an hour later, coming out above the collapsed bridge crossing on a ridge that looked down at the churning black water below. Nathan pulled his horse up beside her wagon, and they both looked at what remained of the bridge in the glow of the lantern. Twisted lumber. Broken crossbeams hanging into the river. The whole structure folded like paper. "I will be damned," Nathan said quietly. "Yes," Clara said. "You very nearly were." He looked at her then, and it was a different kind of looking than before. Before he had been assessing her. Now he was seeing her, which was not the same thing, and Clara had enough experience of the difference to recognize it when it happened. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I owe you my life." "You owe me nothing," she said. "I did what anyone with sense would have done." "No," he said, and there was something deliberate in his voice, something that pushed back against her deflection without being unkind about it. "They would not have. I have known a great many people who would have kept riding home in that rain and told themselves the stranger on the road was not their concern. You did not do that." Clara did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. "Where are you going tonight?" he asked. "The Hatch property, about 2 miles south." "Alone." "I have been going places alone for a long time, Mr. Caldwell." "I do not doubt it," he said. "Still, in this weather, I would feel better knowing you arrived safely." "I imagine I will arrive safely whether you feel better about it or not," Clara said, "but I appreciate the concern." Something in his expression shifted towards something that might have been amusement. "You are very direct, Miss Whitmore." "People have called it other things," she said. "Good night, Mr. Caldwell." She clicked her tongue at the horse and her wagon rolled forward into the dark. She did not look back. She heard him sit still on his horse for a moment, watching her go, and then the sound of hooves moving away in the other direction. She told herself she would not think about him again. She was wrong about that. The Hatch property was a working ranch owned by a man named Gerald Hatch, who was decent enough in practice and exhausting in personality. He had hired Clara 3 years ago when she was 25 and newly without family land, and he paid her a fair wage to cook, keep the supply records, and manage the household accounts, none of which he had any talent for himself. His wife Dorothea was a small, brisk woman who treated Clara with the particular brand of coolness reserved for someone you depend on, but do not want to admit you depend on. The other women in Burnt Creek, that was the name of the nearest town, a collection of perhaps 400 souls arranged around a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a doctor's office, and an assortment of ambitions. The other women had their own ways of making Clara understand where she stood. They did it in the grocery store, when they stepped slightly to the side to widen the aisle as she passed, as though she could not be trusted to navigate around them herself. They did it at church when they arranged themselves in the pews, so there was never quite a space that fit her comfortably. They did it in conversation by talking to her face, but watching her body, their eyes performing small calculations that always arrived at the same answer, not like us. Clara had decided a long time ago that she was not going to spend her life being angry about it. Anger was expensive. It cost you sleep and appetite, and the ability to think clearly, and Clara needed to think clearly because she had no one else to think for her. So she put the anger somewhere low and quiet inside herself and kept it there. And she did her work, and she knew things that the women in the pews and the men at the general store counter did not know, and she found her worth in that knowing rather than in their acknowledgement of it. The morning after the storm, Gerald Hatch came in from the fields looking stunned. "Blackwater Bridge is gone," he said. "Came down in the night. 2 men from the Miller spread tried to cross it first thing this morning and found nothing but river." "I know," Clara said. She was rolling out dough at the kitchen table. "I heard it fall." He stared at her. "You heard it." "I was on my way back from Delmore's settlement. I turned around and warned the first rider I encountered." Gerald was quiet for a moment, processing this in the slow, thorough way he processed most information. "Who was the rider?" "A man named Nathan Caldwell. He said he was heading for the Caldwell Ranch on the north side of the creek." Gerald's expression changed. "Nathan Caldwell," he repeated. "As in the Caldwell Ranch, the whole northern range." "I did not ask him the dimensions of his property," Clara said. "I asked him to stop riding toward a collapsed bridge." Gerald sat down at the table. "Clara," he said in the voice he used when he was about to say something he expected her to find significant, "Nathan Caldwell just inherited the largest single ranch in this part of Montana. His father passed 2 months ago. The man is worth more money than this town will see in 20 years combined." Clara pressed her palm into the dough and folded it over. "That is very interesting, Gerald." "You saved his life. I warned him about a bridge. He made his own decision to turn around." Clara. "The dough needs another 10 minutes, she said. "And the supply ledger for March is sitting on your desk, waiting for you to sign it." Gerald looked at her the way people often looked at her when she declined to be impressed by the things they found impressive. Then he got up and went to his desk. Clara finished the dough and tried not to think about the way Nathan Caldwell had looked at her from his horse in the rain. Not the first look, the second one. The one after he saw the bridge. 3 days later, Nathan Caldwell rode up to the Hatch property in the afternoon. Clara was in the yard checking the axle on the supply wagon when she heard the hoofbeats. She did not look up immediately. She had learned not to arrange herself for the arrival of company, because people read that kind of readiness as eagerness, and eagerness gave them power. She heard Gerald's voice warm and slightly too loud, the way it got when he was talking to someone he wanted something from. She heard a second voice lower, with that same quality of control she remembered from the road. She straightened up and turned around. Nathan Caldwell looked different in daylight than he had in the rain. The rain had made him indistinct a shape and a voice. In the afternoon sun, he was specific a man, somewhere in his early 30s, with a straight, even face, dark eyes that moved carefully over whatever they landed on, and the kind of stillness that comes not from inaction, but from economy of motion. He wore his good clothes without apparent awareness of them, which meant they were simply his clothes. He saw her the moment he turned from Gerald. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and there was something in his voice that recognized her. Not just identified her, recognized her the way you recognized someone you had been thinking about. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "can I help you with something?" "I came to thank you properly," he said. "I told you there was nothing to thank me for." "You did," he agreed. "I did not find that convincing." Gerald was watching this exchange with poorly concealed fascination. Clara ignored him. "I appreciate the visit," she said, "but I have work to finish. I would like to speak with you for a few minutes if that is possible." She looked at him steadily. His manner was direct and respectful, and there was nothing in his posture or expression that suggested he expected her to accommodate him simply because he was who he was. That was unusual enough that she nodded and set down her wrench. They walked to the far side of the yard, out of Gerald's immediate earshot. "I asked around about you," Nathan said. "Did you?" "People in town have a great deal to say about Clara Whitmore." "I imagine they do," she said. "Little of it useful." You are right about that, he said, and the flatness of his agreement caught her off guard. What I heard mostly was opinion dressed up as fact. People who do not know the difference between a person's ability and their appearance. But I also spoke to Ben Delmore at the settlement. He told me you have been running supplies to his family through 3 winters on roads that most men in this county won't attempt. Clara said nothing. He also told me, Nathan continued, that you keep the route maps in your head because you have never seen a written map that accounted correctly for what those roads do in spring thaw. And that on at least 2 occasions you spotted trail conditions that would have broken wagon axles and routed around them without being asked. Ben Delmore talks too much, Clara said. He talks about people who have earned it, Nathan said. Miss Whitmore, I am going to be direct with you because I think you prefer it. I do. I need someone who understands supply logistics in rough terrain. My father's ranch ran on the knowledge of a man named Foster who passed last winter. I have records and ledgers, but no one who understands the land itself. The routes, the crossings, the seasonal variations. The knowledge that is not written down because it lives in the person who does the work. He paused. I think you have that knowledge. Clara looked at him carefully. You are offering me a position. I am, he said. Supply and route management for the Caldwell Ranch. Fair wages, proper housing on the property. Work that matches what you are actually capable of. She was quiet for a moment. In all her years in Burnt Creek, no one had offered her work that matched what she was actually capable of. Gerald Hatch had given her accounting and cooking and called it enough. Other ranchers had turned her away at the door. The general store owner had once told her directly in front of 2 other customers that he did not think she could manage the physical demands of stock work, despite the fact that she routinely loaded and unloaded supply wagons that his own stock boys struggled with. The offer sitting in front of her now was different from any of that. It was also coming from a man she had known for 3 days, one of which had involved rain and darkness and a collapsed bridge. Why? She asked. He looked at her. I told you. You told me what you need. I am asking why you came to me specifically. There are men in this county who know supply logistics. There are, he agreed, and not one of them thought to stand in the road on a stormy night to warn a stranger about a crossing they could not see. He said it without theater, simply as a statement of the reasoning. I have been running a ranch for 2 months since my father passed. I have been making decisions based on incomplete information and the wrong kinds of advice. I need someone whose instinct I can trust. You turned your wagon around in a storm for a person you had never met. That is the instinct I need. Clara looked at him for a long time. I will need to speak with Gerald Hatch, she said finally. Give him proper notice. Of course. And I would want to see the route records your man Foster kept before I agree to anything. I will not accept a position I cannot actually perform. Agreed. And the housing arrangement would need to be understood clearly and in writing. I have had enough of situations where the terms change after I have committed to them. Something moved through his expression. Something careful and attentive. The way a person listens when they understand they are being told something important, even if it is not being said directly. I understand, he said. In writing. Whatever you need. Clara nodded once. I will give you my answer in 2 days, she said, after I have spoken with Gerald and reviewed what Foster left behind. That is more than fair, Nathan Caldwell said. He touched the brim of his hat, a small, clean gesture, and walked back to where his horse was hitched. Clara watched him ride out through the gate. She picked up her wrench and went back to the wagon axle. Her hands were steady. Her mind was not. She thought about what Ben Delmore had told her once in his particular blunt way when she had asked him why he trusted her route decisions without question. He had looked at her with some surprise and said, Clara, you are the only person who ever rode out to check the condition of a thing before telling me the condition of it. Every other supply runner tells me what they think. You tell me what you found. She had not known what to do with that at the time. She was still figuring it out. Gerald Hatch, when she told him, went through 3 distinct emotional phases in approximately 7 minutes. First, he was startled. Then he was wounded in the way that employers become wounded when someone they have underpaid decides to leave. Then he was calculating because Gerald was always calculating. "You cannot seriously be considering this," he said. "I am past considering it," Clara said. "I have decided. I wanted to give you proper notice as a courtesy. Clara, the Caldwell Ranch is 20 miles from town. You will be the only woman on a working ranch with a crew of men you do not know." "I have been the only woman in difficult situations before," she said. "I managed." "What will people say?" "Gerald," Clara said, with the measured patience she had been practicing for 3 years. "What people say has never altered the quality of my work. I do not expect it to start now." He tried a few more approaches. She was polite through all of them. When he had exhausted his arguments, she thanked him for 3 years of employment, told Dorothea she had left the supply ledgers in order through the end of the season, and began packing the small collection of belongings that constituted her life in the back room of the Hatch property. She took the route records Nathan had sent over by messenger the following morning and spread them across the small table in her room. She went through them for 4 hours, cross-referencing them against the maps she carried in her head, checking Foster's notes against her own knowledge of the terrain, looking for gaps and errors, and the places where written records always failed to capture what the land actually did. There were more gaps than she had hoped. Foster had been thorough, but he had been a man who thought in summer. His notes on winter crossings were thin. His notes on the eastern ridge and spring thaw were almost non-existent. There was an entire northern approach to the property that he had marked as impassable without further comment, which meant either he had given up on it or he had known something he had not written down. She noted all of it. She made her own list of what she would need to know and what she would need to check herself before she could confirm any route as reliable. Then she packed the records carefully, put them with her belongings, and rode out to the Caldwell Ranch the next morning. She arrived in the early afternoon. The ranch was larger than she had imagined. Not that she had allowed herself to imagine it extensively, because that was the kind of thinking that led to expectations, and expectations in her experience were a reliable source of injury. But it was large, and it was well built, and it sat against the hills with the permanence of something that had been planned rather than accumulated. A group of ranch hands were working near the main corral. They stopped when her wagon rolled through the gate. She had grown up being looked at. She knew the varieties of it. Curiosity, dismissal, hostility, the complicated kind that mixed all three. The men at the corral were running through several of those at once as she brought her wagon to a halt in the yard. One of them, a stocky man with the weathered face of someone who worked outside in all weather, took a few steps toward her. "Help you with something?" "I am Clara Whitmore," she said. "Mr. Caldwell is expecting me." The man's expression did something complicated. "Right," he said. He looked at the other men who were performing the elaborate pantomime of not watching. "I will get him." Nathan came out of the main house a few minutes later. He walked across the yard toward her with a directness that did not pause to arrange itself, which Clara appreciated. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you came." "I said I would give you my answer in 2 days," she said. "It has been 2 days. And I reviewed Foster's records," she said. "There are gaps. The winter crossings are underdocumented, the Eastern Ridge approach is barely noted, and there is a northern route he marked impassable without explanation. I will need to ride those routes myself before I can tell you what is actually usable." "Understood," Nathan said. "My answer is yes," she said. "With the terms we discussed." "In writing," he said. "As agreed." She nodded. One of the ranch hands near the corral said something to the man beside him in a low voice. She did not catch the words, but she caught the register the particular tone of a comment that was intended to be half heard. Nathan caught it too. He turned his head toward the corral, and something in the quality of his stillness changed the way the air changes just before lightning. "Harlan," he said. The stocky man straightened. "Sir." "Miss Whitmore is the new supply and route manager for this ranch," Nathan said. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "She has more practical knowledge of the terrain in this part of Montana than anyone currently employed here, including myself. That is why she is here. Any man who cannot extend her the professional respect that position warrants can collect his wages at the end of the week." He paused. "Is that understood?" Silence from the corral. Yes, sir, Harlan said. Nathan turned back to Clara, as if the exchange had not happened. I will have the written terms ready this afternoon, he said. Would you like to see your housing first, or would you prefer to start with the supply records? Clara looked at him steadily. He had just done something that no one in her professional life had ever done. He had defended her position before it was questioned, before anyone had moved against her openly, before she had asked him to. He had done it simply and without drama, as though it were the obvious thing to do, because it was her professional position, and that was what professional positions warranted. She did not know what to do with that either. Supply records, she said. The housing can wait. The faintest hint of something moved at the corner of his mouth. Then follow me, Nathan Caldwell said. And Clara Whitmore followed him into the house that would before long become the most complicated and honest and unexpected chapter of a life that had always been measured by what she could carry, rather than what she was worth. She did not know that yet. But she was beginning for the first time in a long time to wonder. The supply records room smelled like old paper and tobacco, and the particular kind of dust that accumulates in places where someone has worked hard for a long time. Clara sat at the table where Foster must have spent 1,000 hours and spread his ledgers open in front of her, and Nathan Caldwell pulled a chair to the opposite side and did not say anything while she read. That was the first thing she noticed about him in close quarters. He did not fill silence with noise. Most people did. Most people became uncomfortable when conversation stopped and rushed to cover it over with words that did not mean anything. Nathan sat with the silence the way a man sits with weather. He cannot change patiently and without complaint and let her work. She worked for 40 minutes without speaking. He waited. Finally, she looked up. Foster was afraid of the northern approach, she said. Nathan frowned. Afraid of it. Not physically, professionally. He marked it impassable and then stopped thinking about it. That is what fear looks like in a ledger. You mark something impossible so you do not have to keep trying to solve it. She tapped the relevant page. But this route, if it is what I think it is, would cut your winter supply time from the eastern settlements by nearly 2 days. That is not nothing. Foster said the ground was unstable. Foster said the ground was unstable in August. August and February are not the same ground. She closed the ledger. I need to write it before I can tell you anything useful, but I think he gave up too early. Nathan looked at her for a moment. When would you want to go? Tomorrow morning if the weather holds. I will ride with you. She looked up from the ledger. That is not necessary. It is my land, he said, and you are new to it. I am not questioning your competence. I am saying I would like to know the route when you find it. The distinction was clear, and she accepted it. Fine. Early. Early, he agreed. She looked back at the records and turned to the next page, and Nathan Caldwell leaned back in his chair and watched her work with an expression she did not see, because she was not looking at him. If she had been looking, she might have seen something she was not yet ready to see. The ranch hands had their own relationship with her arrival that began the moment her wagon rolled through the gate and evolved over the following days, in directions she had not entirely predicted. There were 6 of them working the main spread. Harlan, the stocky foreman, who had greeted her with suspicion and received Nathan's response, with a silence that she read as disciplined rather than converted. A young man named Reuben, who was 19 and looked younger and had the quality of someone who had not yet decided what kind of man he intended to be. 2 brothers named Cole and August Pratt, who operated as a unit and seemed to regard the world as a series of conditions to be endured. A quiet veteran hand named Dell, who had worked the ranch under Nathan's father for 11 years and had the particular stillness of a man who had outlasted enough change to stop being surprised by it. And a newer hire called Jack Finney, who was charming in the way that people are charming when they are accustomed to getting by on it. Harlan was the one she needed to read correctly, because Harlan set the temperature of the crew. On the first morning he came to her before Nathan was up and found her at the supply shed going through the inventory. You are going to want to move the grain stores, he said. It was not unfriendly. It was the tone of someone who had decided to engage on neutral ground and see what happened. I was just thinking that, Clara said. The current position puts them in the path of the spring runoff from the north roof. Foster's notes say the shed never flooded, but I looked at the roof slope last night, and I do not believe him." Harlan was quiet for a moment. "The shed flooded in March of '82, he said. "Before my time, Dell told me." "Then Foster was documenting what he wanted to be true rather than what was," Clara said. "That is a habit we will need to correct across these records. Do you know how the grain was moved in the past? What equipment was used?" He told her. They talked for 20 minutes about the supply shed with no particular agenda except the supply shed, and by the end of it, Harlan's posture had changed in a way that was small and not dramatic, but was real. He was talking to someone he had decided was worth talking to. She did not celebrate that. She filed it and moved on. Jack Finney was a different calculation entirely. He appeared at her elbow on the second afternoon while she was recording inventory counts and leaned against the doorframe with the easy confidence of a man who expected his presence to be welcome. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you need a hand with any of that?" "No," she said without looking up. "I know these stores better than anyone on the crew, except maybe Dell." "Then I will ask Dell," she said. I was quiet for a beat, and she could feel him recalibrating. "No offense intended," he said. "I am just saying I could be useful to you." "I will let you know when I need something," Clara said. "Thank you, Mr. Finney." He left. She heard him say something to Cole Pratt outside the door, his voice dropping below the range she could make out, and Cole laugh. She did not need to hear the words to know the register. She had heard it in 100 different rooms in her life. It was the particular laugh of men who had decided a woman's competence was an appropriate subject for entertainment. She finished her count. She did not give them the satisfaction of changing her pace or her expression, but she noted it. She noted it carefully and stored it in the place where she kept things that might matter later. The ride along the northern approach the following morning was the first time Clara understood something about Nathan Caldwell that his behavior in her presence had not yet made obvious. He rode well. He knew the land. He did not pretend to know things he did not know, which was rarer in men than it should have been. And when she stopped to examine a stretch of ground or a drainage pattern, he waited without pushing and asked questions afterward that were specific and genuine rather than performed. "Here," she said at one point, stopping her horse at the edge of a slope that fell away toward a flat-bottomed gully. "This is what Foster was afraid of. See how the ground reads from up here." Nathan studied it. "It looks soft. It looks soft in summer. But see the rock shelf about 30 feet down where the color changes." She pointed. "That shelf is what matters. The soft ground sits on top of it. In winter, the frost drives down to the shelf, and everything above it hardens. In late February, this slope would carry a loaded wagon without difficulty." He looked at it for a long moment. Foster did not see the shelf. "Foster did not look for the shelf," she said. "He saw soft ground and made his decision." Nathan turned his head and looked at her. "How do you know to look for the shelf?" "My father showed me," she said. "He said the ground always tells you what is underneath it if you know what questions to ask. Most people ask the wrong questions." He was quiet for a moment. "What was his name?" Nathan asked. The question was unexpected enough that she answered it honestly before she had time to decide whether she wanted to. "Henry Whitmore," she said. "He ran wagon routes through the Central Ranges for 20 years. He taught you everything you know about this land." "Most of it," she said. "The rest I learned by being wrong and surviving it." Nathan almost smiled. It was not quite a smile, but it was adjacent to one, and she noticed it and looked back at the slope. "This route is viable," she said. "I want to ride another 3 miles north to confirm the crossing point I am thinking of. But if it is what I believe, you have a winter supply route that nobody on this ranch currently knows exists." "Then let us ride 3 more miles," Nathan said. They rode north. That was the morning Clara stopped thinking of the Caldwell Ranch as a position she had accepted and started thinking of it as a problem she was going to solve. She did not yet think of it as a home. That would take longer. The first serious challenge came at the end of her second week, and it came from a direction she had not been watching. A woman named Margaret Hale rode out to the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 friends and a purpose that she wore openly on her face. Margaret Hale was the wife of the county's largest cattle broker, and she was the kind of woman who had organized her social world with the precision and intentionality of a military campaign. She was handsome, well-dressed, and approximately as warm as the northern approach in August. She arrived while Nathan was out on the eastern range, and Clara was in the yard checking the wheel fittings on the supply wagon. Margaret looked at Clara with the particular expression of a woman who has already reached a conclusion and is simply conducting the formality of an introduction. "You must be the new supply manager," she said. "Clara Whitmore," Clara said, and did not extend her hand because Margaret had not moved to extend hers. "I have heard about you," Margaret said. "The whole county has, really. Nathan Caldwell hiring a woman to manage his routes. It is quite the topic." "I imagine it is," Clara said. "Where did you come from originally?" "Miss Whitmore before the Hatch property." "Montana," Clara said. "I have always been here." One of Margaret's companions, a younger woman with restless eyes, covered a small laugh with her hand. Margaret did not bother. "I meant your background," she said. "Your family." "My father ran wagon routes through the Central Ranges," Clara said. "My mother passed when I was 8. I have been working since I was 12. She said it plainly without apology or emphasis, as a statement of fact that required no decoration. Margaret absorbed this. "And Nathan finds your background useful," she said. "He finds my knowledge useful," Clara said. "Yes, of course." Margaret tilted her head, performing a consideration she had already completed before she arrived. "You must understand, Miss Whitmore, that we who have known Nathan for a long time feel a certain responsibility toward him, especially now after his father's passing. He is a man of significant assets and significant standing, and he is frankly at the age where certain decisions can be made poorly if the right counsel is not available." Clara looked at her steadily. "What decisions are you referring to, Mrs. Hale?" "Professional decisions," Margaret said, and the pause before professional was as specific as a pointed finger. "The management of a ranch of this scale requires experience and credibility, not simply initiative." The yard was very quiet. Clara set down the wheel fitting she had been holding. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "I have reviewed every supply route on this property, identified 3 that are currently costing the ranch unnecessary time and expense, located a winter crossing that has never been documented in any of the ranch's records, and reorganized the supply inventory so that the spring restock can be completed in 2 trips instead of 4. I have done this in 2 weeks." She paused. "I am happy to discuss credibility further, but I will need you to be more specific about which part of that work concerns you." Margaret's expression sharpened. "I think," she said, "that some things are better discussed with Nathan directly." "Then I suggest you wait for him," Clara said, "or come back another time. He should be back from the eastern range by late afternoon." The silence stretched. Margaret gathered herself with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been executing graceful retreats for years and made them look like strategic advances. "We will come back another time," she said. "Lovely to meet you, Miss Whitmore." She left. Clara picked up the wheel fitting and went back to work. Her hands were shaking very slightly, and she was furious at them for it. She was still in the yard when Nathan rode in 2 hours later. He swung down from his horse, and one look at her face made him stop. "What happened?" he said. "Margaret Hale paid a visit," Clara said. Something moved through his expression, something that was not quite surprise. "What did she say?" Clara told him plainly, and without embellishment, exactly what had been said. She watched his jaw tighten as she spoke not at her, but at something else. Something she did not yet have the full shape of. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Margaret Hale," he said carefully, "has been trying to arrange my affairs to her satisfaction since before my father died. She has a daughter who is 19 years old and very lovely, and not remotely interested in ranching or hard work or anything that involves being more than 20 miles from a city." Clara looked at him. "I see." "She is not your problem," he said. "She is mine." "I handled it," Clara said. "I know you did," he said. "That is not what I mean. I mean the source of it is mine to address." He looked at her directly. "You should not have to defend your position here. Not to Margaret Hale, not to anyone." I have been defending my position my whole life, Clara said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite an argument, but was close to one. I am reasonably good at it by now. That is not the point, Nathan said. Then what is the point? He looked at her for a long moment, and what she saw in his expression was not pity, which she would have rejected immediately, and it was not guilt, which would have been about him rather than about her. It was something more direct than either. The point, he said, is that you should not have to be. Not here. She did not know what to say to that. He took his horse to the stable. She stood in the yard for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she went back to work. The thing about working alongside someone every day in hard country was that pretense became expensive very quickly. There was no social architecture to hide behind, no dinner party manners, no careful distance maintained by the presence of others. There was the land and the work and the daily problem of getting necessary things from one place to another, and either you communicated directly or you communicated wrong, and people and supplies ended up in the wrong places. Nathan Caldwell communicated directly. Clara had expected when she took the position that she would be largely managing things at a remove, keeping records, coordinating with the hands, consulting with Nathan when decisions needed his approval. She had not expected him to ride the routes with her as often as he did. She had not expected him to ask the questions he asked, specific and probing and genuinely curious about drainage and soil composition and the behavior of particular creek crossings in different weather. She had not expected him to remember what she told him one day and apply it the next correctly without prompting. She had underestimated him. She was willing to admit it privately. How was not the pampered inheritor? She had half expected a man who owned land, the way other men wore expensive boots, as a statement of position, rather than a relationship with something real. He had grown up on this ranch. He knew the work. He had simply, somewhere in the years between his youth and his father's death, allowed himself to become the administrator of it, rather than the practitioner, and now he was recalibrating. She understood that kind of recalibration. She had done versions of it herself. "You are different when you are working," he said to her one morning about 3 weeks into her time at the ranch. They were on horseback halfway along the northern approach she had identified, checking the crossing point against the weather they had been having. She looked over at him. "What do you mean?" "In the house when there are other people around you are contained," he said. "Like you are aware of where all of your edges are at all times, and you are keeping them inside a certain boundary. Out here, you are not doing that." Clara was quiet for a moment. It was an uncomfortably accurate observation. "Out here, what I look like does not matter," she said finally. "What I know matters. What I can do matters. There is no one watching to see if I am taking up the right amount of space." He looked at her when she said that, and his look was the kind that meant he was storing the information carefully rather than reacting to it immediately. "You think about that," he said. "Taking up space. When you have spent your whole life being told you are taking up too much of it," Clara said. "Yes, you think about it." He did not say anything for a while. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality, something quieter and more considered. "My father used to say that the land does not care what a man looks like, only what he does with it." "Your father sounds like he understood something important," Clara said. "He understood most things," Nathan said. "Not all of them, but most." A pause. "I am still working on the rest." She did not ask what he meant by that. She thought she might already know. The crisis came on a Thursday in the third week fast and without warning, the way crises in hard country almost always did. One of the Pratt brothers, Cole, came riding hard back to the main ranch in the early afternoon. Clara heard him coming from inside the supply shed and was already in the yard when he pulled up his horse, blowing hard. "There is a wagon down on the creek road," he said. "Ben Holloway. Axle broke on the near side and the load shifted into the creek bank. He has got 300 pounds of feed grain on that wagon." "Which creek crossing?" Clara asked. "The lower one, by the cottonwoods." She knew exactly where. She also knew that creek crossing had a soft shoulder on the near side that swelled with moisture in wet weather, and that Cole Pratt, who had been on this ranch for 2 years, apparently did not know it or had not thought to warn Holloway. She did not say that. She was already moving. "Get August and Reuben," she said. "Bring the heavy rope from the south shed, not the regular rope, the heavy one with the iron rings, and the flat planks from behind the grain store." Cole looked at her. "What are the planks for?" "The shoulder on that crossing is soft right now. We cannot bring another loaded wagon in without support under the wheels, or we will have 2 wagons down instead of 1. She was walking toward the stable as she talked. "Move, Cole. That grain will not stay dry on a creek bank indefinitely." He moved. Nathan appeared from the direction of the house, having heard the commotion. "What is happening?" Clara gave him the situation in 4 sentences. He nodded once. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Not what do you want to do, or let me handle this. What do you need from me?" "Come if you want," she said. "But stay back until I have looked at the shoulder condition myself. If I read it wrong, we could make it worse." "Lead," he said simply. They reached the creek crossing in 20 minutes. Ben Holloway was a rancher in his 50s with a bad leg and a worse temper, and he was standing at the edge of the damaged wagon, swearing comprehensively at the universe when they arrived. Clara swung down before the horse fully stopped and walked to the edge of the shoulder, crouching down to read the ground. She pressed her palm flat against it in 2 places. Stood. Walked 6 feet in the other direction and crouched again. "The soft zone is about 8 feet wide," she said, partly to herself and partly to Nathan, who had come up behind her. "If we can get the planks laid across it, starting from firm ground, a light wagon can cross to reach Holloway's. We pull his wagon from the far side and distribute the weight as we go." "You sure about the plank width?" Nathan asked. "No," she said. "I am 50% sure, which is 50% more than anyone else here, but I have worked this kind of shoulder before, and I believe the planks will hold if we move steady." She straightened. "The risk is that I am wrong, and we sink a second wagon. The alternative is that we leave 300 pounds of feed grain on a creek bank until the ground firms, which in this weather might be 4 days. Nathan looked at her. "What do you want to do?" She had already made the decision. She had made it while she was talking. But she noted that he asked what she wanted to do, rather than making the call himself, and she noted it without showing that she noted it. "Lay the planks," she said. "Move steady. Have the rope attached before we cross, so if we start to sink, we can pull back immediately." They laid the planks. Reuben, who turned out to have a natural feeling for this kind of careful physical work, helped her position them with a focus and precision that surprised her. The light wagon crossed. The planks held. They reached Holloway's wagon, rigged the heavy rope to the intact side of the broken axle, and pulled it back from the creek bank with 3 men on the rope, and Nathan Caldwell on his horse providing the anchor weight. The grain was wet on one side. Not ruined. Salvageable. Bun. Holloway, who had been swearing for the better part of an hour, stopped swearing and looked at Clara with the expression of a man recalibrating rapidly. "You are the new one at Caldwell's," he said. It was not a question. "Clara Whitmore," she said. "Ben Holloway," he said. He looked at the planks at the wagon at the grain. "Where did you learn that?" "My father," she said. "He pulled a lot of wagons out of bad crossings." Bun. Holloway grunted, which was the closest thing to gratitude she was going to get from him, and which she accepted without complaint. On the ride back, Reuben pulled his horse up alongside her. He was quiet for a moment in the tentative way of someone who wants to say something and is not sure it will be received well. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Yes." "I did not think the planks would work." "I was not entirely sure they would either," she said. He absorbed this. "But you did it anyway. When the alternative is doing nothing," she said, "and doing nothing is worse, you do the thing you are not entirely sure of." She glanced at him. "That is not recklessness. That is reading the odds correctly and accepting the risk that is left over." Reuben rode quietly for a moment. "Nobody explained it like that before," he said. "Most people do not explain things," Clara said. "They just do them and expect others to follow. That is a waste of everyone's time." She heard him thinking about that for the rest of the ride. That night, Nathan knocked on the door of the supply office where she was finishing the updated route records for the northern approach. "Come in," she said without looking up. He came in and sat in the chair across from her, the same chair he had sat in on her first day, and he had a look on his face that she had not seen from him before. Not the contained, deliberate expression he usually wore. Something underneath it. "Cole Pratt told me something tonight," he said. She looked up. He said, Nathan continued, "and I am giving you his exact words because they matter, that he has been doing things wrong on those creek crossings for 2 years, and no one told him, because no one caught it." He paused. "He wanted me to tell you that you could have called him out this afternoon in front of everyone, and did not, and he knows it." Clara looked at him steadily. "Calling him out would not have gotten Holloway's grain off that creek bank." "No," Nathan said. "It would not have." He was quiet for a moment. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Keep the main thing, he said. "In the middle of all the other things. Stay on the problem." She thought about it honestly. "I suppose," she said slowly, "because no one ever gave me the luxury of making it about something else. When you are the person who everyone expects to fail, you cannot afford to lose time on anything except solving the problem in front of you." Nathan was very still. "That should not be the reason," he said. "You should not have had to learn it that way." "No," she agreed. "But I did. And I know it now, and that is the part that matters." He looked at her for a long moment. And in the lamplight of that supply office with route maps spread between them and the smell of dust and old paper in the air, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way that either of them would have been able to name precisely if asked. But the distance between the position she held and the person she was began very quietly to collapse. Nathan Caldwell looked at Clara Whitmore. Not at what she could do for his ranch. At her. And Clara, who had spent her entire life being looked at and almost never truly seen, felt the difference. The way you feel a change in temperature, not as a thought, but as a physical fact arriving in the body before the mind has caught up with it. She looked back down at her maps. "The northern route will be ready to document by end of week," she said. "Good," Nathan said. He stood, moved toward the door, stopped. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he had used her first name without Miss in front of it. She looked up. "What you did today," he said, "the planks, the crossing Holloway's grain, that is not just competence. That is the kind of thinking this ranch has needed for a long time." He said it plainly, without ceremony. "I want you to know that I see it." He left. Clara sat at the table for a long time after the door closed. "I want you to know that I see it." 8 words. She had been working and moving and surviving in this valley for years, and no one had put 8 words together in exactly that sequence and aimed them at her. She was not foolish enough to build a life on 8 words. But she was honest enough to admit in the private territory of her own chest that they landed somewhere they had never landed before. She picked up her pen. She wrote the date at the top of the next page of the route ledger, and she kept working. Outside, the Montana night settled cold and clear over the Caldwell Ranch, and somewhere in the darkness between where she sat and where he was, something that had no name, yet was quietly beginning to take one. The northern route documentation was finished on a Friday, and Clara delivered it to Nathan's desk with the kind of thoroughness that made him sit down and read the entire thing before he said a word. She stood and waited. She was not nervous about it. The work was right, and she knew it was right, and she had stopped needing external validation of things. She had verified herself somewhere around the age of 14, when she had realized that waiting for other people to confirm what she already knew was simply a way of losing time. Nathan read for 11 minutes without speaking. Then he set the papers down. "This adds 2 days to winter supply capacity," he said. "Closer to 2.5, Clara said, "depending on load weight. And Foster never documented this." "Foster documented what he understood," she said. "Some things require writing them before you understand them." Nathan looked at the papers for another moment. Then he looked at her. "I want to show this to Dell," he said. "He has been here longer than anyone. If there are holes in it, he will find them." "Good," Clara said. "Show it to Dell." She meant it. She had no patience for work that could not survive scrutiny. Dell, when Nathan brought him the route documentation. After supper, read it slowly and carefully, in the way of a man who reads infrequently, but takes it seriously when he does. Clara sat across the table and drank her coffee, and let him read without explaining herself. When he finished, Dell set the papers flat on the table and smoothed them once with his palm, a gesture that somehow communicated respect for the work without requiring words. "Your father," Dell said. "Henry Whitmore. He ran the Central routes." "Yes," Clara said. Dell nodded slowly. "I knew a man who worked with him once. Said Henry Whitmore could read a trail the way most men read a newspaper. Said he was never wrong about ground." He looked at Clara. "You read it the same way." It was the most Dell had said to her at one time since she arrived. She understood that it was also the most he needed to say. "The route is sound," Dell told Nathan. "Use it." Nathan looked at Clara across the table, and there was something in the look that was close to satisfaction, not his own satisfaction at being proven right about her, but something that ran in the opposite direction. Satisfaction on her behalf, about a thing she had earned, which was a different thing entirely, and rarer. She looked back at her coffee. The days settled into a rhythm that Clara had not experienced before in her working life. A rhythm that was demanding and complicated and full of problems to solve, but that did not require her to be smaller than she was in order to participate in it. She brought the supply records into an order they had apparently never known. She identified a vendor in the eastern settlements who had been overcharging the ranch for 3 years through a combination of sloppy accounting and the assumption that no one would check. She checked. She corrected it. She found 2 better sources for winter feed that cut costs without cutting quality, and she documented both with the kind of specificity that meant anyone who came after her could follow the reasoning without having to reconstruct it from scratch. Nathan watched all of this without intruding on it, which she appreciated more than she would have admitted. He also had a habit of appearing at the supply shed with 2 cups of coffee at the most inconvenient possible times, which she found less easy to categorize. "You do not have to do that," she told him the 3rd time it happened. "I know," he said, and handed her the cup. She took it because arguing would have required more energy than accepting it. Jack Finney, who had been watching the dynamic between Nathan and Clara with the alert, calculating interest of a man who understood the value of information, made his second approach on a Tuesday evening near the end of Clara's 4th week. She was at the supply shed late working by lamplight when she heard his step at the door. She knew his step by now. It was the step of a man who moved with deliberate ease, always just slightly too comfortable in spaces he had not been invited into. "Working late again," he said. "Yes," she said. "You know," he said, moving into the shed with the casual confidence that was his signature, "some of the boys have been talking." "I imagine they have," Clara said without looking up. "They are wondering," he said, "about you and Mr. Caldwell." She did not respond. "It is just conversation," Finney said. "People are curious. A man like Nathan Caldwell, all that land, all that money, and then suddenly there is a woman on the property who is getting his private attention." He paused, letting the word private do its work. "People notice things." Clara set down her pen. She turned and looked at Jack Finney directly, and she looked at him long enough that he shifted his weight. "Mr. Finney," she said, "I am going to say this once clearly, so there is no confusion later. My relationship with Nathan Caldwell is professional. It is also none of your business. And if the conversation you are describing continues among the crew, I will bring it to Nathan's attention directly and let him address it. Is that understood?" Finney's easy expression tightened at the edges. "No offense intended, Miss Whitmore." I know," she said. "That is the most dangerous kind." He left. She turned back to her work. But her hand was not quite steady on the pen, and she sat for a moment without writing, because the thing Finney had said, however, contemptibly he had said, it had touched something that was already there. Not the implication of anything improper. The simpler and more treacherous part, the fact that she had been noticing for some time now that Nathan Caldwell's appearances at her work were more frequent than professional necessity required. She had been filing that observation in the place where she kept things she was not ready to examine. It was getting harder to keep them there. Finney went to Nathan. She had half expected it. Men like Finney always went to the person with authority because they believed authority could be leveraged, and they were usually right about that. What she had not expected was Nathan to come to her afterward with a look on his face that she had not seen from him before. Not anger exactly. The controlled version of it that looked from the outside like stillness, but was not stillness at all. "Finney came to me this evening," he said. "I expected he might," Clara said. "He told me you threatened him. I told him if a specific conversation continued among the crew, I would bring it to your attention," Clara said. "I consider that a statement of fact rather than a threat, but I understand how the distinction might be lost on someone like Finney." Nathan looked at her steadily. "What conversation?" She told him plainly and briefly. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. "I will let Finney go at the end of the week," he said. Clara shook her head. "Do not do that." He looked at her. He is a working man, and firing him over gossip will make it look as though the gossip has something to it," she said. "Tell him clearly what the professional expectations are. Keep him on. If he violates them again, then let him go. But not for this." She paused. "I am not fragile, Nathan. I do not need you to make problems disappear on my behalf. I need you to have expectations of your crew that make the problems less likely to appear in the first place." It was the second time she had used his first name without thinking about it. She realized it a moment after she said it. He realized it at the same moment. Neither of them acknowledged it. "You are right," he said after a brief pause. "I will talk to Finney." "Thank you," she said. He turned to leave, then stopped the way he did sometimes, as though a thought had come up in him so fast it caught him mid-motion. "Clara," he said. She waited. "Do you know what the thing is that I find most—" He stopped, reconsidered, started again. "When I first saw you in the road that night in the rain, I thought you were the most determined thing I had ever seen. I did not think about anything else. Not your size. Not whether you should have been out on that road alone. Not anything that the people in this county have probably been reducing you to your whole life. I just thought there is a person who has made a decision." Clara did not move. "I want you to know," he said, that is still what I see, exactly that, nothing more complicated than that." He left before she could answer. She sat with the words for a long time. Then she picked up her pen. And then the world came apart. It started with a letter. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, delivered by a rider from Burnt Creek, addressed to Nathan Caldwell in handwriting that Clara did not recognize, but Nathan did. She could tell because his expression when he took the letter and turned it over was the expression of someone confronting something they had known was coming, but had hoped in the private, irrational way that hoping sometimes works would not come. He read it in his office with the door closed. He came to find her an hour later, and something had changed in him. Something that she would not have been able to define precisely, but could feel the way you feel. A drop in temperature, not with your eyes, but with your whole surface. He sat down across from her and put the letter on the table between them. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "There is a land dispute," he said. "It has been dormant for 6 years. My father's lawyers believed it was resolved. It was not." Clara looked at the letter. She did not pick it up. "The dispute," Nathan said, "involves the southern parcels of this ranch, the ones that border the old Whitmore claims." The room was very quiet. Clara looked up from the letter. "Say that again," she said. "The property my father acquired in 1871, Nathan said, and his voice was careful and deliberate, was partly assembled through the purchase of several land claims in the southern range. One of those claims was contested at the time of purchase. The man who originally filed on it was accused of falsifying survey documents." He stopped. "His name was in the lawyer's papers as Henry Whitmore." The silence between them was absolute. Clara felt something happen in her chest that was not quite pain and not quite recognition, but was made of both of them. She had known for her whole life that her father had lost his land claims. She had been 17 when it happened. She had watched him spend the last 4 years of his life arguing a case that no one with any power wanted to hear because the people who benefited from ignoring it had more influence than one wagon route man and his daughter. She had never known the full shape of it. She had known the outcome. She had not known the mechanism. She looked at Nathan Caldwell and understood in the specific and terrible way that you understand something when all the pieces arrive at once exactly what she was looking at. "Your father," she said. Her voice was very steady. "Your father bought my father's land." "Yes," Nathan said. "After my father was accused of falsifying documents." "Yes, and your father believed the accusation." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I do not know what my father believed," he said. "I know what he did. I have been going through his records since this letter arrived, and I can tell you exactly what he did. But I cannot tell you what he believed because he is not here to tell me." Clara stood up from the table. She did not walk away. She did not know where she would have walked to. She stood beside the table and looked at the far wall, and put everything she was feeling somewhere manageable, because this was not the moment to not be manageable. "What is in the records?" she said finally. "Clara. Nathan." She turned and looked at him. "What is in the records?" He told her. It took 20 minutes. He was precise and thorough, and did not soften anything which she respected even through the anger that was building under her ribcage, like water behind a dam. The accusation against her father had originated with a man named Silas Pruitt, who was a land broker, and who had in 1871 been in the business of identifying contested claims and resolving them profitably. Pruitt had accused Henry Whitmore of falsifying survey documents. The accusation had been enough to cloud the title. Nathan's father, acting on advice from his own lawyers and the assumption that the accusation was legitimate, had purchased the disputed claim from Pruitt at a discounted price. Henry Whitmore had spent 4 years contesting it. He had died without resolution. Clara knew that part. She had been at the end of it. What she had not known was that there were documents, survey documents, original ones that her father had filed in 1869, and that proved the claim was legitimately his. Those documents had not been produced at the hearing. Pruitt had stated they did not exist. Nathan's lawyers, going back through the full record at Nathan's instruction over the past year, had found a reference to them in a secondary filing that Pruitt had missed. The documents existed, or rather, there was evidence that they had existed. Whether they still did was a different question. "Where would they be?" Clara asked. Her voice was level. "That is what I am trying to find out," Nathan said. "The county land office keeps records going back to the territory years, but they are—" He paused. "It will take time to find them, if they are still there." "How much time?" "Weeks, possibly months." Clara looked at him. "You have known about this for how long?" Nathan did not look away. "I found the reference to the original documents 14 days ago," he said. "I have been working with my lawyers to verify what it means before I came to you. I did not want to bring you something that might turn out to be incomplete." 14 days. He had been working beside her riding routes with her, bringing her coffee at inconvenient hours for 14 days while he knew this. She tried to read him and found she could not, which was unsettling because she had gotten reasonably good at reading him. "You should have told me immediately," she said. "Yes," he said. "I should have." He did not defend the decision. "I was wrong." She looked at him for a long moment. "I need some time," she said. "Of course." She walked out of the supply office and into the yard, and kept walking until she reached the fence line at the north end of the property, and she stood there with her hands on the top rail and looked at the range her father had once claimed, and thought about a man who had spent 4 years fighting for the truth of something and had not lived to see it vindicated. She thought about what Nathan had said to her 3 nights ago in the lamplight of that office. "I want you to know that I see it." She thought about what it meant that the land she was standing on might have been her family's land. That the ranch she had come to through the specific accident of a storm and a collapsed bridge might have had her father's name on it once. She did not cry. She had long since moved past the age where crying was her first response to impossible things. But she stood at that fence for a long time. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was Nathan. He stood beside her at the fence. He did not touch her. He did not speak immediately. He simply stood in the same way he sat, with silence, without trying to cover it over. My father was not a dishonest man, she said. I know, Nathan said. He spent everything he had fighting that accusation. He died with almost nothing because of it. And I spent the years after his death working for other people on land that should have been mine. She kept her voice level. That is not a small thing. No, Nathan said. It is not. What do you intend to do? Find the documents, he said. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. And when they are found, make the record correct. He paused. And there are financial questions that my lawyers are already looking at. What the land was worth, what it produced, what... He stopped. I am not going to reduce this to numbers in front of you, but I want you to know that I intend to address all of it, fully. Clara turned her head and looked at him. Why? She said. He looked at her steadily. Because it is the right thing to do. That is not a complete answer, she said. Plenty of people know what the right thing is and do not do it. Because your father deserved better, he said. Because you have deserved better your whole life, and part of that debt is connected to decisions made by people with my name. He held her gaze. And because you are standing on this ranch right now, and I would like you to be able to stand on it without what is underneath it being wrong. The wind moved across the range between them. Clara turned back to look at the land. I am not leaving, she said. In case that is what you are worried about. She heard the breath he released. I was, he admitted. I have unfinished work, she said. And running away from the place where the problem is does not solve the problem. She paused. But Nathan, this changes things. I know, he said. I do not know yet what it changes them to, she said. I need time to figure that out. You have time, he said. All you need. She nodded once. Neither of them moved from the fence for a while. What neither of them knew yet was that the letter was only the beginning. Because 3 days after Nathan told Clara about the land documents, Silas Pruitt's son arrived in Burnt Creek. His name was Edmund Pruitt, and he was 40 years old, well-dressed, and had the careful, deliberate manner of a man who had spent a great deal of time understanding which levers moved which people. He had his father's instinct for the profitable application of other people's trouble. He had learned to be more sophisticated about it. He arrived ostensibly for a property assessment. The old Pruitt land interests had passed to him through inheritance, and he had papers from a county office that gave him a reason to be present in Burnt Creek that sounded, when explained quickly, like routine business. What he was actually there for was the documents. Nathan's lawyers had made inquiries at the county land office. Edmund Pruitt, through his own network, had heard about those inquiries within 48 hours. He came to the Caldwell Ranch on a Saturday morning unannounced. Clara was in the yard when he rode in. She did not know who he was, but she knew the quality of his arrival, the way some men carry themselves when they believe they are arriving to a situation they already control. She had seen that quality before in the land brokers and lawyers who had circled her father's case like birds waiting for something to stop moving. She felt it before she understood it. I am looking for Nathan Caldwell, the man said. He is on the Eastern Range this morning, Clara said. Is he expecting you? He will want to see me, the man said. Tell him Edmund Pruitt is here. The name landed in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. She did not show it. She had 20 years of practice not showing the things that landed in her chest. I will send someone to find him, she said. You can wait in the yard. She turned to Reuben, who was nearby. Ride out to the Eastern Range and tell Mr. Caldwell he has a visitor. Tell him the visitor's name. She held Reuben's eyes for a half-second longer than necessary to make sure he understood that the name mattered. Reuben read her. He nodded and went. Edmund Pruitt waited in the yard. He looked around the ranch with the evaluating eyes of a man who was adding things up. His gaze moved over the supply shed, the stable, the newly organized storage areas, and came to rest on Clara with the mild curiosity of someone who has not yet decided whether another person is relevant. You work here? He asked. I manage supply and route operations, Clara said. Ah, he said, and went back to looking at the property. She kept working. Nathan came back from the Eastern Range at a pace that said, Reuben had communicated the urgency correctly. He swung down from his horse, handed the reins to August Pratt, and walked across the yard toward Pruitt, with the contained, deliberate stride that Clara had come to associate with him, keeping something careful inside himself. "Mr. Pruitt," he said. He did not extend his hand. Pruitt noticed that. "Mr. Caldwell, I hope I am not arriving at a bad time." "You are arriving unannounced," Nathan said. "But come inside." He glanced at Clara as he passed. The glance said nothing specific. It said everything necessary. She went back to her inventory and could not concentrate on a single number. They were inside for 40 minutes. When Edmund Pruitt came out, he looked the same as when he had gone in. That was its own kind of information. A man who looked exactly the same coming out of a difficult conversation as going into it had prepared himself for it beforehand, and a man who had prepared himself for it beforehand had known it was going to be difficult. He stopped in the yard and looked at Clara. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Forgive me. Are you related to Henry Whitmore, who filed on the Southern parcels in the Territory years?" She met his eyes directly. "He was my father." Pruitt absorbed this. "Small world," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "It is." He rode out. She watched him go. Nathan came out of the house and stood beside her. "I wants to settle the Whitmore claim quietly," Nathan said. "He came here to offer a number. He wants the whole thing resolved before it reaches a public hearing." "What number?" Clara asked. Nathan told her. It was not nothing. It was also approximately 1/5 of what the land had been worth in 1871, and an infinitely smaller fraction of what it had produced in the years since. "What did you tell him?" Clara asked. "I told him I would need to consult with my lawyers and my associates," Nathan said. "I did not accept." Clara looked at him. "You should have refused outright." "I wanted to tell you first," he said. "This is your family's land we are talking about. That number is not my decision." Something about that hit her in a place she was not prepared for. She turned away so he could not see her face. "The documents," she said. "Your lawyers are still looking." "Yes. If they find them," she said, "it changes his position entirely. He knows that. That is why he came now." "Yes," Nathan said. "I know." She turned back. Her jaw was set. "Do not settle," she said. "Not at that number. Not at any number that does not account for what that land produced." "Clara, my father spent 4 years and everything he had trying to prove he was honest," she said, and her voice was steady and hard and completely controlled. "He died without seeing it done. I am not going to let a man named Pruitt put a small number on that and call it closed. If there are documents, we find them. And if they say what your lawyers think they say, then the full truth comes out. In public, where everyone who knew my father can hear it." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. "Not are you sure, or that will be complicated, or let me think about it. All right, 2 words." She exhaled slowly. But Edmund Pruitt, riding back toward Burnt Creek, was not the kind of man who accepted a closed door. He had his father's documents too, and he understood exactly what exposure looked like and how much time he had to prevent it. The next move was not the one Clara expected. It came through Margaret Hale. Of course it did. Margaret Hale, who had ridden out to the ranch 6 weeks ago with 2 friends, and a purpose had known Edmund Pruitt's father, and had in the years since maintained a careful relationship with Edmund himself. The Pruitts and the Hales had overlapping interests in county land matters that went back 20 years and had never been formally acknowledged and never needed to be. Margaret came to Clara directly this time. Not to the ranch. She appeared at the general store in Burnt Creek on a Thursday morning when Clara was collecting a supply order, and the appearance was not accidental. "Miss Whitmore," Margaret said, "I wonder if I might have a word." Clara looked at her. "You might," she said. They stepped to the side of the store out of the way of the counter traffic. "I have heard," Margaret said carefully, "that there is some discussion about old land records, claims from the Territory years." "You heard that," Clara said. "Burnt Creek is a small place," Margaret said. "Things travel." She paused. "I want to offer you some advice as one woman to another." Clara waited. "Land disputes are ugly business," Margaret said. "They take years, They cost money that most people do not have, and even when they resolve, they leave damage behind. Relationships, reputations. She let that word land. Sometimes the most sensible path is the one that ends things cleanly, even if it does not end them perfectly. Clara looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "are you here on your own behalf or on someone else's?" Margaret's expression did not change. She was very good at this. "I am here because I have known Nathan Caldwell since he was a boy, and I do not wish to see him drawn into something that damages his standing in this county." "His standing," Clara said. "He has worked very hard to build what he has," Margaret said. "And he is at an age where one poor decision or one association that becomes—" she paused. "Complicated. Can undo a great deal." Clara let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Hale, if you are suggesting that my presence in Nathan Caldwell's life is a poor decision or a complicated association, I would ask you to say that plainly rather than decorating it." Something moved through Margaret's expression. Not discomfort. Something colder than discomfort. "You are a smart woman," Margaret said. "I think you understand what I am saying." "I am a smart woman," Clara agreed. "Smart enough to understand that you came here this morning on behalf of Edmund Pruitt, because he needs this to go away quietly, and he cannot come to me himself without admitting exactly how worried he is about those documents." She watched Margaret's face. "Smart enough to know that the fact that you are here at all means the documents are real, because if they were not real, there would be nothing to protect." Margaret was very still. Clara picked up her supply order from the counter. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale," she said. She walked out, and behind her in the small, dusty general store in Burnt Creek, Margaret Hale stood completely still and understood for the first time that she had entirely underestimated the woman standing in Nathan Caldwell's road. Clara did not tell Nathan about the encounter immediately. She rode back to the ranch, put away the supplies, completed her afternoon route check, ate supper with the crew, and waited until the evening was quiet before she knocked on the door of his office. She told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She confirmed the documents are real." "She did not mean to," Clara said. "But yes." Nathan leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Something was moving through him, some internal recalibration, and Clara watched it happen. "My father," he said slowly, "was a man who believed in what he was told by people he trusted. He trusted Pruitt's lawyers. He trusted the process." A pause. "He was not cruel. He was not dishonest. But he bought land that was not for sale because someone lied to him, and he did not look closely enough to see the lie." "And now it is yours," Clara said. "And now it is mine," he said. "And so is the responsibility to correct it." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" she said. "In practice, it means," Nathan said, "that when the documents are found, I will stand up at the county land office or in whatever public forum is necessary, and I will say plainly and completely what happened. What Pruitt did. What my father unknowingly participated in. What your father lost because of it." He held her eyes. "And then I will make it right. To the degree that anything this old can be made right." Clara sat with that for a moment. "You understand what that does to your family name," she said. "My family name is mine to manage," he said. "I would rather manage it honestly than protect it with silence." The lamp between them threw a warm, unsteady light across the desk. Clara looked at this man who had inherited land and money and a complicated history and who was choosing without being forced to look at all of it directly. She thought about the rain. She thought about the road. She thought about standing in front of his horse in the dark, with her arms stretched wide, willing to stop something that was going to cause harm because she was the only person in a position to stop it. She had not expected that night to be standing here 6 weeks later, looking at the same man, choosing to do the same kind of thing. Stop something that was causing harm. Even when stopping it cost something. "Nathan," she said. He looked at her. She wanted to say something that matched the size of the moment. She had never been good at that. Words for her were tools. She used them precisely and practically, and she did not dress them up. But what came out was honest, which was the only thing she knew how to be. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and what she saw in his face was not the satisfaction of being thanked. It was something quieter and more serious than that. Something that was about her and not about him. "Clara," he said, "I need to tell you something." She waited. "I have been trying to find the right moment to say this for some time," he said, "and I have come to believe that waiting for the right moment is its own kind of cowardice." He paused. "What I feel toward you is not simply the respect of an employer for a capable employee. It has not been that for a long time." He held her gaze steadily, the way he always held it, without flinching from whatever he might find there. "I do not know what you feel. I am not asking you to feel anything you do not feel. But I did not want to stand in front of you in the middle of all of this and pretend I did not feel what I feel. That seemed like its own kind of dishonesty." The lamp flickered. Clara sat very still. She thought of Jack Finney's insinuations and Margaret Hale's decorated warnings, and the weeks of careful professional distance she had maintained, because distance was the only armor she had ever had, and she had worn it so long she had almost forgotten there was a person inside it. She thought of a man who had waited 11 minutes without speaking while she read route documentation, who had defended her position before anyone openly challenged it, who had said, "I want you to know that I see it," and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with what she could do for his ranch. "I know what I feel," she said. He went very still. "I have known for a while," she said. "I did not say anything because—" She stopped. She had to be honest about this. It was the only thing she knew how to be. "Because I have spent my whole life being told that what I feel does not fit into the spaces other people leave for it. That I take up too much room. That wanting things is a privilege that belongs to other kinds of women." She looked at him directly. "It is very difficult to stop believing that, even when someone is standing in front of you giving you evidence against it." Nathan looked at her, and the thing in his expression was not triumph, and it was not relief. It was the particular tenderness of someone who has just been trusted with something fragile and understands exactly what that means. He did not move toward her. He did not do anything that would make the moment require something from her before she was ready. "I am not asking you to stop believing it all at once," he said. "I am only asking you to let me keep giving you evidence against it." The lamp burned. The ranch was quiet around them, and Clara Whitmore, who had been standing in the road her whole life, stopping things from going wrong for everyone else, sat in the lamplight of a supply office that was built on her family's land, and looked at a man who had just asked to be part of the evidence that she was worth saving too. She did not say yes. Not yet. But for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she did not say no. She did not sleep well that night. That was not unusual. Clara had never been a particularly good sleeper. Her mind tended to keep working after the rest of her was supposed to stop running through supply problems and route variables and the kind of low-level logistical calculations that did not have an off switch. But this was different. This was not the productive restlessness of a mind working a problem. This was the particular sleeplessness of someone who has said something true out loud for the first time and cannot stop hearing it echoing. "I know what I feel." She had said that to Nathan Caldwell. In the lamplight of his office with his father's land dispute, sitting on the desk between them, and the weight of everything she had spent her life not saying pressing against the inside of her chest. She had said it, and he had looked at her the way he looked at things he was taking seriously, and then he had said, "Let me keep giving you evidence against it," and then she had gone to bed and stared at the ceiling for 4 hours. By the time the sky outside her window had moved from black to the dark blue that preceded everything else, she had arrived at a decision. Not about Nathan. That was going to take longer than one sleepless night, and she was not going to rush it simply because the feeling was present. She had made the mistake before in the early years after her father's death of moving toward things too quickly, because they were warm and she was cold, and she had learned what that cost. No. The decision was about Edmund Pruitt. Because whatever was happening between her and Nathan Caldwell, Pruitt was not going to wait for it to resolve itself. He had come to the ranch once. He had sent Margaret Hale. He was a man running out of time, and men running out of time became unpredictable, and Clara had enough experience of being the person other people tried to move out of the way to know that predictability was a luxury she could not afford right now. She got up before dawn and went to the supply office and sat with a blank page and thought about what she knew. She knew the documents existed. Margaret Hale's visit had confirmed it the way a man flinching confirms the blow he was trying to avoid. She knew they were at the county land office, or had been. Nathan's lawyers had found a reference to a secondary filing. Secondary filings meant there had been a primary filing, and primary filings at the Territorial Land Office were bound by law to be retained for a minimum of 30 years. It was 1884. The original filing was from 1869. 15 years. Still within the retention window. She knew Pruitt knew all of this. And she knew that a man who knew the documents were within reach and had come to buy silence had one remaining option when silence could not be bought. Make the documents disappear before anyone found them. She wrote that down. She stared at it. Then she got dressed, saddled her horse in the dark, and rode 20 miles to the county seat before anyone on the ranch had eaten breakfast. The county land office opened at 8 in the morning. Clara was at the door at 7:45. The clerk who arrived to unlock it was a young man named Harold, who looked at her with the polite confusion of someone not accustomed to finding women waiting on his doorstep before business hours. "I need to access the territorial survey records from 1869, Clara said. "Claims filed under the name Henry Whitmore Central Range Parcels, Southern Montana." Harold blinked. "Those would be in the archive, the pre-statehood records." "I know what they are," Clara said. "I need to see them." He let her in. The archive was a back room with shelves of bound ledgers and rolled surveys organized by year and claim number. It smelled like the particular combination of old paper and institutional dust that meant records had been sitting untouched for a long time. Clara knew how to read archive organization. Her father had taught her that too, during the years he spent fighting the case, explaining the system of territorial land records to her so that she would understand what he was looking for. She found the 1869 ledger in 12 minutes. She found Henry Whitmore's primary filing in 3 more. Her hands were completely steady as she opened the ledger to the relevant page. The filing was there, complete. Her father's signature at the bottom in the handwriting she still recognized from grocery lists and supply notes, and the birthday letter. He had written her when she turned 16, 2 years before. Everything came apart. The survey coordinates were precise and correctly formatted. The witness signatures were present. There was nothing falsified about any of it. She had known that. She had always known that. But knowing something and seeing the proof of it written in your father's own hand were different things, and she sat with that difference for a long moment before she allowed herself to move forward. Then she looked for the secondary filing. It was not where it should have been. She checked twice. She checked the adjacent years. She checked the index at the front of each bound volume. The secondary filing that Nathan's lawyers had found a reference to was not in the archive. She sat back and thought about that with the careful, methodical part of her mind that did not panic. Someone had removed it. Not recently. The dust pattern on the shelf was undisturbed. But at some point between 1871 and now, someone had taken that secondary filing out of the archive, and it had not come back. She needed the primary filing. It was still here. She needed Nathan's lawyers to know it was here today before anyone else came looking. She went back to Harold at the front desk. "I need a certified copy of the Henry Whitmore primary filing 1969, she said. "Today." Harold looked uncertain. "Certified copies usually take 3 to 5 days. Harold," Clara said, and her voice had the particular quality of a woman who has ridden 20 miles before breakfast and is not interested in the usual timeline. "The document I am asking you to copy is in that archive right now. I need a certified copy today because there is reason to believe that someone is aware of the document's existence and has already removed related records from this office. If you cannot process the copy today, I need you to tell me who in this county has the authority to authorize an emergency certification." Harold stared at her. "Judge Harmon," he said. "He is the county recorder." "Where is his office?" She had a certified copy of Henry Whitmore's primary land filing in her hands by 11 o'clock that morning. She rode back to the Caldwell Ranch at a pace that was not safe for the road conditions, and arrived in the early afternoon to find Nathan in the yard talking to Harlan with the expression of a man who has been trying to project calm for several hours. He saw her ride in, and the projection stopped. She swung down and crossed the yard to him and held out the document. "The primary filing exists," she said. "It has always existed. The secondary filing has been removed from the archive at some point. I do not know when or by whom, but the timing is consistent with the original dispute proceedings. The primary filing proves the claim was legitimate. I have a certified copy." Nathan took the document. He read it. His jaw tightened. "His signature," he said. "Yes." He looked up at her. "You rode to the county seat before dawn." "Someone needed to," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and she recognized the expression because she had seen it before, the one that was not about the ranch or the land or the legal question, but was about her specifically, the particular look of a man who keeps finding her doing things that catch him without a prepared response. "Come inside," he said. "My lawyers need to hear this today." The meeting with Nathan's lawyers lasted 3 hours and produced the particular kind of exhaustion that came from sitting in a room with men who thought carefully and spoke precisely and took nothing on faith. Clara did not find that exhausting in the normal way. She found it clarifying. The lawyers were from Miles City, and they had the reputation of the Caldwell Ranch to consider, which meant they were motivated to get this right. By the time the meeting ended, the plan was in place. A formal petition to the county land office to examine the provenance of the missing secondary filing. A public proceeding, not a private settlement. Nathan's explicit rejection of Edmund Pruitt's offer delivered in writing with the reason stated plainly. The reason being that the original claim had been legitimate, the accusation had been false, and the Caldwell family intended to say so publicly. Clara walked out of that meeting and sat on the porch steps and breathed the evening air, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like something her father had built was still standing. Nathan came out and sat beside her. Not close enough to be presumptuous, close enough to be present. "How are you?" he said. "I do not know yet," she said honestly. "Ask me in a few days." "All right," he said. They sat for a while without talking, which had become one of the things she most valued about him, the fact that silence in his presence did not require explanation. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "When this is done, when the record is corrected and the proceeding is finished." She stopped, started again. "I want to talk about what you said the other night." He was very still beside her. "I am not saying I am ready now," she said. "I am saying I want to be ready, and I want you to know that." I was quiet for a moment. "That is enough," he said. "That is more than enough." She nodded once. The stars were coming out over the Montana range, and the Caldwell Ranch was quiet around them, and for a moment the whole weight of everything that was coming felt if not light exactly, then at least bearable. It did not stay quiet for long. Edmund Pruitt's response to Nathan's written rejection arrived the following morning, and it was not what either of them had expected. It was not a counteroffer. It was not a legal filing. It was a letter to the editor of the Burnt Creek Courier. The letter appeared in print 3 days later. It was signed by Edmund Pruitt, and it was carefully professionally worded, but its intent was as clear as a blade in daylight. It described in broad terms the ongoing land dispute. It referenced the Caldwell Ranch's recent hiring of a woman with a personal stake in the outcome of that dispute. It raised without stating directly the question of whether the management of that dispute was being influenced by parties whose interests were not purely legal or financial. It was, in short, a public attack on Clara's integrity and a public suggestion about her relationship with Nathan, and it was written precisely enough to be impossible to directly refute without giving it more attention than it deserved. Clara read it at the general store in Burnt Creek on a Friday morning, standing at the counter where Harold Kessler had left a copy, and she read it twice to make sure she understood exactly what it was doing before she let herself feel anything about it. Then she folded it, put it in her coat pocket, and completed her supply purchase. She heard the whispers starting on the street before she reached her wagon. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough. the particular whisper register of a community that has been given a story to tell about someone and is deciding how much to believe it. She had grown up in the sound of that register. She knew it the way you know the voice of someone who has never wished you well. She drove back to the ranch. Nathan had already seen the letter. Harlan had ridden in with it an hour ahead of her. He met her in the yard with an expression she had not seen from him before and would not have expected from him: fury. Not the controlled, quiet variety. The real kind. The kind that lives in the jaw and the set of the shoulders and the particular stillness of a man deciding very deliberately not to act on what he is feeling. "I am going to the courier," he said. "You are not," Clara said. "He has accused you." "He has implied things," Clara said. "Carefully, in writing. Which means he knows he cannot prove what he is implying, so he is making it into a question and letting other people's assumptions do his work for him." She looked at Nathan directly. "If you go to the courier in this state, you confirm everything he is implying. You prove that your judgment is being driven by personal feeling rather than legal principle." Nathan's jaw worked. "I know," he said. "I know you are right." "The answer to this letter," Clara said, "is the proceeding. When the documents are presented publicly and the truth is on record, no one will be able to claim that this was personal. It will be factual. It will be complete, and Edmund Pruitt will not be able to walk it back." "That takes time," Nathan said. "Yes," Clara said. "It does." He looked at her. "In the meantime, this county is going to be talking." "The county has been talking about me since I was old enough to walk through it," Clara said. "I have not dissolved yet." Something in his expression shifted from fury toward something else, something that was grief and admiration in roughly equal measure, and did not know which way to land. "Clara," he said. "Nathan, I need you to hear me." She held his gaze. "Do not fight this battle the way Edmund Pruitt wants you to fight it. Fight it the way the truth fights it. Slowly, on the record, in public, where everyone can see it clearly." He was quiet for a long moment. "All right," he said. The waiting was the hardest part, not because Clara was not accustomed to it. She had been waiting her whole life in one form or another, waiting for someone to see past the surface of her, waiting for her father's case to resolve, waiting for the work she did to be acknowledged by the people who benefited from it. She was built for the long patience that survival required. But this waiting was different because it was not just her own life on the line. It was her father's name. And that made it larger than she was in the way that certain things are larger than any individual can fully hold. The crew of the Caldwell Ranch knew something was happening. They could not have missed it. Nathan's lawyers came and went. There were closed-door conversations and urgent riders from the county seat. Clara worked her routes and kept her records and ate supper with the crew and did not discuss any of it, and the crew taking their temperature from Harlan and Dell followed her lead and did not ask. Reuben was the exception, in the small, indirect way that 19-year-olds sometimes were. He appeared at the supply shed one evening toward the end of the first week of waiting and stood in the doorway with the studied casualness of someone who has been working up to something. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Reuben." "I read the letter in the courier," he said. She waited. "It was a low thing," he said. "What he wrote." "Yes," she said. "It was. I wanted you to know." He stopped. Tried again with the careful articulation of someone translating something internal into words for the first time. "The crew, most of us. We know what kind of person you are. We have been watching you work for 2 months. Nobody who watches you work thinks what that letter is trying to make people think." Clara set down her pen. She looked at Reuben, who was 19 years old, and had the instinct for decency that some people were born with and others never found regardless of age. "Thank you," she said. "That means something." He nodded, still studying the floor, and then went back to wherever he had come from. She sat with that for a moment. She thought about what it meant that a 19-year-old ranch hand had come to tell her that, and what it would have meant to the 25-year-old version of herself, who had arrived in Burnt Creek after her father's death with nothing except what she could carry, and whatever knowledge she had accumulated, and the dull, persistent understanding that no one was going to give her anything she did not earn herself. That version of herself would not have believed Reuben's words were possible. She was glad to have been wrong about that. Jack Finney left the ranch at the end of that week. Not because Nathan let him go. Because Finney had read the letter in the Courier and made a calculation, and the calculation told him that the safe bet was no longer Clara Whitmore, and that he had been on the wrong side of the arithmetic. He came to Clara before he left, which surprised her. "I want to tell you something," he said. He had lost most of the easy confidence that was his usual register. What was underneath it was younger and less certain and more real. She waited. "What I said to you in the shed, the night I came in and talked about people noticing things." He stopped. "That was a mean thing to do. I was trying to make trouble for you because I thought—" He stopped again. "I thought you were going to make things harder for the men on this crew, and I thought if I made it uncomfortable enough, you would leave." He looked at her directly. "I was wrong about why you were here, and I was wrong to do it." Clara looked at him for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because I am leaving," he said, "and I did not want to leave without saying it." She nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, Mr. Finney." He left. She thought about him for a while. Not with warmth exactly, but with the particular complicated absence of grudge that she had cultivated as a survival mechanism, and that had over the years become something more genuine than mechanism. Holding grudges required energy. She had always had better things to do with energy. The twist came on a Tuesday, 2 weeks into the waiting, and it came from the last direction Clara would have looked. Dell found her. Dell, who had worked the Caldwell Ranch for 11 years, who had read the Northern Route documentation and smoothed it once with his palm, who had known someone who worked with her father and said she read the land the same way he did. He came to her in the supply shed on a Tuesday afternoon with the deliberate movement of a man who has made a decision and is carrying it carefully. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I need to show you something." She looked up. Dell's face had a quality she had not seen on it before. Not distress. Something more settled than distress. The look of someone who has been deciding whether to say something for a long time and has finally decided. "All right," she said. He sat across from her and put a folded paper on the table. "I have had this for 8 years, he said. She looked at it, did not touch it yet. "It belonged to Nathan's father," Dell said. "He gave it to me a month before he died. He said it was something he had been meaning to do something about and had not. He said he was not going to live long enough to do it himself. He asked me to give it to the right person when the right time came." Dell looked at her steadily. "I did not know when the right time was. I thought I would know it when I saw it." He nodded at the paper. Clara picked it up and opened it. It was a letter, handwritten in the careful script of an educated man getting old. Dated 1876. Signed by Robert Caldwell. She read it. It took her 4 minutes. When she finished, she was completely still. Robert Caldwell had known. Not from the beginning, the letter was clear about that. He had believed Pruitt's accusation when he purchased the land. But 2 years after the purchase, he had found a discrepancy in the survey documents that Pruitt had provided. He had investigated quietly without informing his lawyers or making a formal record, because by that point, Henry Whitmore was already deep into the contest process, and Robert Caldwell had not known how to undo what had been done without destroying his own standing in the county. He had been a coward about it. The letter said so in those precise words. "I was a coward about it." He had kept a copy of the secondary filing, the one that was now missing from the county land office. He had kept it not to use it against Henry Whitmore, but because he could not bring himself to destroy it. And when he knew he was dying, he had given it to the only person on the ranch he trusted completely. Dell, who had been waiting 8 years for the right person to give it to. Clara set the letter down very carefully. "Dell," she said. Her voice was steady. "The copy of the secondary filing. Do you have it?" Dell reached into his coat and put a folded document on the table beside the letter. She looked at it for a long moment before she touched it. Then she picked it up and opened it, and her father's handwriting was there again in the secondary filing he had submitted as corroboration of the primary claim. The document that had been removed from the county archive. The document that Edmund Pruitt's father had caused to disappear, and that Robert Caldwell had quietly, guiltily kept. Henry Whitmore had never falsified a single word. And now the proof was complete. Clara put the document down on the table beside the letter and the certified copy of the primary filing and sat with all three of them in front of her. She was not crying. She was thinking. She was doing the thing she had always done when the world became very large and very loud around her. She was going very quiet inside herself and letting the thing settle into its correct shape. "Does Nathan know you have these?" she asked. "No," Dell said. "Only me." She nodded. She thought about what Robert Caldwell had written. "I was a coward about it." She thought about what it meant that a dying man had known this truth and had not been able to bring himself to speak it publicly. She thought about what her father had spent 4 years and everything he had trying to prove, not knowing that the evidence he needed was sitting in the hands of the man who had taken his land. She felt anger. She let herself feel it cleanly and fully for about 30 seconds. Then she set it aside. Because the anger was not the point anymore. The point was what happened next. "I need to tell Nathan," she said. "Yes," Dell said. "Tonight." "I would not wait," Dell said. She stood. She picked up all 3 documents carefully, the way you handle things that matter. "Dell," she said, "you have been waiting 8 years to give this to the right person." He looked at her. "Why me?" she said. He was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was choosing his words with the same care she was choosing hers. "Because," he said finally, "you are the only person I have seen on this ranch who would know exactly what to do with it, and do it right." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she went to find Nathan. He was in his office when she knocked. He looked up, read her face, and pushed back from the desk without a word. She put all 3 documents in front of him and stood back and let him read. He read them slowly, all the way through, twice for the letter. When he finished, he sat for a long time without speaking. "My father knew," he said finally. "Yes." "He knew and he did not—" "No," Clara said. "He did not." She kept her voice level. "He was afraid of what it would cost him. That is a human thing, Nathan. It is not a good thing, but it is a human thing." He looked at her. Something was moving through him that was complicated and painful and real, the way things always were when someone you loved turned out to have failed in a way you could not entirely excuse. "He kept the document," Clara said. "He did not destroy it. He gave it to Dell. He was trying in the way he was capable of at the end to make it right." She paused. "That does not undo what he failed to do earlier. But it is something." Nathan was quiet. "Your father was not the villain of this story," she said. "Pruitt's father was the villain. Your father was a man who made a mistake and spent years not knowing how to correct it. That is different." He looked at her for a long moment. "How are you so generous about this?" "I am not being generous," she said. "I am being accurate. There is a difference." She looked at him directly. "And I need you to be accurate too when you stand up publicly and tell this story. Because if you make your father into a monster, people will spend their attention on the drama of that, and they will miss the actual point. The point is what Pruitt did. The point is what my father lost. The point is that the truth is here now on this table, and it needs to go on the record." Nathan looked at the documents. "The proceeding," he said. "My lawyers can file for an emergency hearing given the new evidence." "Yes," Clara said. "And Nathan. I want to speak at it." He looked up. "It is my father's name," she said. "I want to be the one who says it publicly. I want to stand up in that hearing room and say that Henry Whitmore was an honest man, and here is the proof. I have been carrying that my whole life. I want to put it down in a room where everyone can see me put it down." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then you will," he said. "I will make sure of it." The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the days between, the county shifted in the way that small communities shifted when they sensed something significant was about to happen. A heightened attention, a watchfulness, the particular quality of a population waiting to see how something resolved before deciding what it meant. Margaret Hale made no further appearances. Edmund Pruitt was reported to be in communication with a lawyer from Helena, which was the kind of preparation that told you a man understood he was losing before the verdict was read. Clara worked her routes. She kept her records. She ate supper with the crew every night and said nothing about Thursday, except to Reuben when he appeared at the supply shed 2 days before the hearing with the direct, earnest concern of someone who was not going to pretend he did not know. "Are you ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you scared?" She thought about that honestly. "I am nervous," she said. "Scared is for things you cannot prepare for. I have been preparing for this my whole life, even when I did not know it." Reuben nodded like he was filing that away somewhere permanent. The night before the hearing, Nathan knocked on the door of the supply office. She was not working. She was sitting at the table with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes on the far wall in the particular stillness of someone whose mind is moving very fast while the rest of them holds still. He came in and sat across from her. "How do you feel?" he said. "Like tomorrow matters," she said. "Like there is a version of this that goes wrong and a version that goes right, and I will not know which one it is until I am standing in the room." He nodded. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what you said. About wanting to be the one who says it publicly." He paused. "I want you to know whatever happens in that room tomorrow, however it resolves. The truth of who your father was is not contingent on the hearing. I know it. Dell knows it. The documents know it. The record your father built in 20 years of honest work knows it." She looked at him. "The hearing makes it official," he said. "But it does not make it true. It was already true." She sat with that for a moment. It was a small thing to say, and a large thing to mean, and he had meant it, and she felt it land in the specific place where things that were genuinely meant tended to land. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." She looked at him across the table in the lamplight, with the 3 documents sitting between them, and tomorrow sitting somewhere just beyond the edge of this moment. "When this is done," she said slowly and deliberately, in the way she said things she had decided on rather than things she was still working out, "I would like to have that conversation we have been not quite having." He went very still. "The one about what I feel," she said, "and what you feel. And what that means for 2 people who are standing on a piece of land that should have been complicated between them, and somehow is not." He looked at her, and the expression on his face was not triumph, and it was not relief, and it was not the performance of any emotion. It was simply the unguarded face of a man who has been hoping for something and has just been told to keep hoping. "After tomorrow," he said. "After tomorrow," she said. He stood. He moved toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "Your father would be proud of you," he said. "Not because of what you are going to do tomorrow, because of who you are every day." He left. She sat at the table for a long time. She did not cry, but she let herself feel it, all of it, the grief and the anger and the long patience and the strange unexpected tenderness of being known by someone who had not needed to know her and had chosen to anyway. She let herself feel it fully. Then she put it in its correct place, and she straightened the documents on the table, and she went to bed. Tomorrow, Henry Whitmore's name was going to be spoken out loud, in a room full of people who had once let it be destroyed. Tomorrow his daughter was going to say it. And she was going to say it clearly, without apology, without hesitation, without any of the smallness that the world had spent 28 years trying to reduce her to. She was going to say it the way her father had taught her to say everything that mattered. Straight, clean, true. As if she had every right to be heard. Because she did. The hearing room at the county seat held approximately 60 people when it was full. By 8:45 Thursday morning, it held 83. Clara knew the number because she counted them. It was the kind of thing her mind did automatically when she walked into a space where something important was about to happen. Inventory assessment, the practical act of knowing exactly what she was working with. 83 people in a room built for 60 meant people standing along the back wall and sitting on windowsills and crowding the doorway, and it meant that word had traveled further and faster than she had expected. She had expected this to be witnessed. She had not expected it to be attended. She stood at the front of the room beside Nathan's lead lawyer, a precise man from Miles City named Aldous Webb, who had the quality of someone who had spent 30 years making complicated things legible to rooms full of people and had gotten very good at it. Nathan was to her left. Dell sat in the second row, his hands on his knees, his face carrying the particular expression of a man who had been waiting 8 years for a room like this one. Edmund Pruitt was across the room with his own lawyer, a younger man from Helena, who had the look of someone who had reviewed the evidence the night before and had not slept well afterward. The county recorder, a gray-haired man named Judge Harmon, who had authorized Clara's certified copy 2 weeks ago and had clearly been thinking about it since, called the proceeding to order. Aldous Webb presented the case in the efficient, unhurried manner of a man who knew he had more than enough material and did not need to perform urgency. He presented the primary filing. He presented the certified copy. He presented the letter from Robert Caldwell, which produced a shift in the room that Clara felt as a physical thing, a collective intake that moved through 83 people at once when they understood what they were hearing. Robert Caldwell's own words, admitting what he had known and failed to do. Nathan sat completely still through the reading of his father's letter. Clara watched him from the corner of her eye and did not look away. Whatever he was carrying right now, he was going to carry it in this room in front of these people, and she wanted him to know that she was present. Not looking away. Not finding something else to study when the hard part came. He felt her watching. He did not turn his head, but she saw the slight shift in his jaw that said he knew she was there. That was enough. Webb presented the secondary filing last. The document Dell had kept for 8 years inside his coat. The document Robert Caldwell had not been able to destroy, and had not been able to use, and had finally entrusted to the only person he trusted completely. When Webb put it on the table in front of Judge Harmon and said, "This is the document removed from the county archive during the original proceedings, and this is the evidence of who removed it." The room went so quiet that Clara could hear the man standing behind her breathing. Pruitt's lawyer made 3 objections. Judge Harmon overruled all 3 in the flat, unimpressed tone of a man who had heard every variety of legal maneuvering available and was not finding this particular variety creative. Then Webb turned to Clara. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you wish to address the proceeding." She stood up. She had not written anything down. She had thought about whether to write something and had decided against it, because the things she needed to say had been in her for 20 years, and they did not require notes. They required a voice, and she had one, and she was going to use it. She turned and faced the room. 83 people. She looked at them directly, without performing confidence she did not feel, and without hiding the steadiness she did feel, because the steadiness was real, and it was her father's, and she was not going to apologize for either of those things. "My father's name was Henry Whitmore," she said. Her voice was clear. It carried to the back wall without effort. "He filed on the southern parcels of what is now the Caldwell Range in 1869. He filed legally and completely with accurate surveys and legitimate witness signatures, because that is the only way he knew how to do anything. He was not a complicated man. He was not a political man. He was a man who understood land and work, and the kind of honesty that does not require an audience." She paused. "In 1871, a man named Silas Pruitt told this county that my father had falsified his survey documents. That accusation was a lie. The documents I have submitted to this proceeding today prove it was a lie. Silas Pruitt knew it was a lie when he made it. He made it because my father's honest claim stood between him and a profitable transaction, and he calculated that a wagon route man with no political standing and no wealthy allies was unlikely to survive the accusation long enough to disprove it." The room was completely still. "He was almost right," Clara said. "My father spent 4 years and everything he had trying to prove his honesty to people who had already decided the accusation was more convenient than the truth. He died without seeing the record corrected. He died believing that the county he had worked in for 20 years had decided he was a liar and that there was nothing he could do about it." Her voice did not waver. "I am here today because the record is going to be corrected. Not because it benefits me financially, though I will not pretend the financial question is unimportant. Not because I want revenge, because I do not. I want something that is harder than revenge to achieve and more worth having. I want the people in this room and the people who will hear about this proceeding tomorrow and next week, and in the years after that, to know that Henry Whitmore was an honest man. That he told the truth about his claim, and that the documents prove it. That whatever else this county does or fails to do with this information, that fact is now on the public record, where it cannot be quietly removed. She looked at Edmund Pruitt. He looked back at her. "I do not hold Edmund Pruitt responsible for what his father did," she said. "But I hold him responsible for what he chose to do when he found out the truth was about to come to light. He came to this county to buy silence. When that failed, he tried to use this county's gossip as a weapon against the people who were uncovering the truth. That is not his father's mistake. That is his own choice, and he made it knowing exactly what he was choosing." Pruitt's jaw was tight. His lawyer put a hand on his arm. Clara turned back to the room. "Henry Whitmore was my father," she said. "He was a good man and an honest one, and he deserved better than what this county gave him. I am asking this proceeding to put that on the record. Not for me, for him. Because he earned it 30 years ago, and nobody gave it to him, and the least we can do now is say so." She sat down. The room breathed. Nathan's hand moved on the table between them and stopped 1 inch from hers, and she turned her hand over slightly, just slightly, and his fingers closed around hers with a steadiness that said, "I am here," and asked nothing further. She let him hold on. Judge Harmon reviewed the documents for 12 minutes in absolute silence while the room waited. Then he set them down and looked at Edmund Pruitt's lawyer. "Counselor," he said, "does your client have a response to the evidence presented?" Pruitt's lawyer stood. He was young, and he was good at his work, and he had clearly spent the night making peace with the fact that there was nothing to work with. "Your Honor," he said, "my client does not dispute the authenticity of the documents. He disputes the characterization of his father's actions as deliberate fraud, rather than a good-faith disagreement about survey interpretation." The room stirred. Judge Harmon looked at him with the expression of a man who has heard this before and found it insufficient before. The letter from Robert Caldwell indicates that the original claim was legitimate, and that the accusation against Henry Whitmore was understood to be false by at least one party to the original transaction within 2 years of its conclusion. "Does your client dispute the letter's authenticity?" A pause. "No, Your Honor." "Then we are not discussing a good-faith disagreement about survey interpretation," Judge Harmon said. "We are discussing a false accusation made against an honest man for profit. Sit down, Counselor." The lawyer sat down. Pruitt looked at the table. Judge Harmon ruled in 45 seconds. The record was to be corrected. The primary filing was to be reinstated in Henry Whitmore's name. The removed secondary filing was to be replaced in the archive with a notation of its provenance. The financial question was referred to a separate proceeding, which would address what the land had produced and what the appropriate remedy was. He signed the order before the room had fully processed what had happened. The sound that came from those 83 people was not a cheer. It was more complicated than a cheer. It was the sound of a community hearing something they should have heard a long time ago, and not entirely knowing what to do with the fact that it had taken this long. Clara sat with Nathan's hand around hers and listened to that sound and thought about her father. She thought about a man who had spent 4 years saying, "I am telling the truth. I am telling the truth. I am telling the truth," and being told by every mechanism available to the county that the truth was not what he thought it was. She thought about what that cost him. She thought about what it cost a person to keep insisting on the truth when the world kept insisting otherwise. She thought about the last time she had seen him 2 weeks before he died, sitting at the table in the rented room that was all he had left, still going over his papers, still looking for the thing that would prove it. She thought about how much she would have given to sit in this room beside him today. She felt Nathan's hand tighten slightly around hers, the small specific pressure of someone who understood what the moment was without needing to be told. She did not cry, but she let herself feel it all the way down to the bottom of it, and she stayed there for a moment before she came back up, after the proceeding formally closed. The room took a long time to empty. People moved slowly in the way people move when they are still processing something, and many of them stopped to speak to Clara on their way out, and their words ranged from the genuine to the awkward, to the kind of retroactive sympathy that had always been available in abundance once the risk of extending it was gone. She received all of it with the same measured grace, because they were trying in whatever way they were capable of, and she was not in the business of refusing people's attempts at decency. Ben Holloway stopped in front of her on his way out. He looked at her with the directness of a man who did not waste words. "Your father pulled my cousin's wagon out of a bad crossing in the winter of '73, he said. Wouldn't take payment. Said a man who left another man stuck in a crossing didn't deserve to be on the road." He paused. "That's the man I remembered when all this started. Glad the record says it now, too." He walked out before she could answer. She watched him go. Dell appeared at her elbow. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "He would have been in that front row." "I know," Clara said. "He would have been the one telling you not to be nervous." "I know that too." Dell nodded once. "Good proceeding, Miss Whitmore," he said, and moved toward the door. Edmund Pruitt left without speaking to anyone. His lawyer was on his heels. At the doorway, Pruitt stopped and looked back, and his eyes landed on Clara for one long moment. What was in that look was not remorse, and it was not apology. It was the look of a man who had run his calculation and come up short and knew it. He turned and walked out. She did not watch him go. He was not the point. The room emptied slowly until it was just her and Nathan and Aldous Webb, who was gathering his papers with the efficient satisfaction of a man who likes winning and had won cleanly. "That will hold," Webb said. "The financial proceeding will take time, but the record correction is done. Nobody challenges this order." "Thank you," Nathan said. Webb shook both their hands and left. The room was quiet. Clara stood in the empty hearing room and felt the particular quality of a space where something has just concluded the specific silence of a chapter ending. She stood in it and let it be what it was. Nathan stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "After tomorrow," she had said to him the night before. He had said after tomorrow back. Tomorrow was now. "I want to show you something," Nathan said. She looked at him. "Now." "Now," he said. They rode out together in the afternoon, heading back toward the ranch, and then past it, continuing north toward the southern parcels of the range. The land that the documents had always described as Henry Whitmore's, the land that had been in dispute for 15 years, and was now, as of 45 minutes ago, officially on the correct side of the record. Nathan stopped his horse on a rise that looked out over the flat, wide reach of the southern range. Clara stopped beside him. She had ridden this land before. She had ridden it in her capacity as supply and route manager, assessing it the way she assessed everything functionally, practically, with the trained eye of a woman who had been reading terrain her whole life. She had ridden it without letting herself feel what it was. She let herself feel it now. It was good land. Her father had known it was good land. That was why Pruitt had wanted it. The river access was clean, the graze was rich, and the eastern exposure meant early spring thaw on the slopes that would have given a wagon route man 20 extra working days per year over the northern claims. Her father had known every inch of it. She sat on her horse and looked at it, and felt the grief and the long patience and the strange, unexpected rightness of being here on this particular rise, on this particular afternoon, after this particular morning. "The financial proceeding," Nathan said. "Whatever it determines, whatever the remedy is, I want you to know that my position is that the land produced value for 15 years on a false claim. The calculation needs to reflect that." "Nathan," she said. "I am not negotiating," he said. "I am telling you what I intend to argue." She looked at him. "I was not going to argue with you." He paused. "Oh." "I was going to say thank you," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You do not have to thank me for doing what is right," he said. "I know," she said. "I am thanking you for doing it without being asked." He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the distance between them on this rise with the southern range spread out below, and her father's name finally on the right side of the record, was exactly the distance it had been for months. Close enough to be real, far enough to be a question that had not yet been answered. She answered it. "Nathan," she said, "I have been thinking about what you said, about keeping giving me evidence against the things I was taught to believe about myself." She paused. "You have been doing that since the night you followed me through a mountain pass in the rain. Every day since I came to this ranch. You have been doing it without requiring me to acknowledge it, or respond to it, or be any particular thing in return. She looked at him directly. Nobody has done that before, not once in my whole life. I was very still. I am not going to tell you that I am not afraid, she said. I am. Not of you. Of the size of it. Of wanting something this much, and knowing that wanting things this much is the way people get hurt. She held his gaze. But I have spent my whole life standing in the road and stopping things that were going to cause harm because I was the only one in a position to do it. And the one time I have the chance to stop myself from running away from something that is good and real and true. She stopped. I am not going to do it. I am not going to stand in my own road. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Clara, he said. Yes, I have been in love with you, he said, since the morning I came back to that bridge and saw that you had been exactly right about everything. And I understood that you had turned your wagon around in the dark for a stranger without calculating what it cost you. I have been in love with you since that morning, and I have been trying to give you enough room to find your own way to this, and I have been... He stopped. His voice had the particular roughness of a man saying something true that has been true for a long time. I have been very patient. She almost smiled. You have been, she said. Remarkably so. It was not easy, he said. Oh, she said. I saw. He reached across the space between their horses and held out his hand. She looked at it. She thought about every version of herself that had arrived at this moment. The 12-year-old riding routes with her father. The 17-year-old watching everything fall apart. The 25-year-old arriving in Burnt Creek with nothing but what she could carry. The woman who had stood in a dark road in the rain with her arms stretched wide and refused to move. All of those versions of her had been heading through everything toward this rise this afternoon, this hand. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, the same way they had in the hearing room. Steady, certain, asking. Nothing she had not already decided to give. They sat like that for a while, looking at her father's land, and neither of them needed to fill the silence with anything at all. They were married that autumn in a ceremony, small enough to fit the people who actually mattered, and large enough to be witnessed by the community that had spent years watching Clara Whitmore without seeing her. Nathan had wanted whatever she wanted. She had wanted it simple and honest and done because she was not a woman who needed ceremony to make things real. What was real was already real. The ceremony was for everyone else. Dell stood in the front row with the particular expression of a man who has waited 8 years for something and found the waiting to have been worth it. Reuben stood beside him, looking young and serious, and moved in the way that 19-year-olds are moved when they witness things they do not yet have words for, but will remember for the rest of their lives. Even Harlan, who had greeted her wagon with suspicion on her first day and had spent months recalibrating, stood with his hat in his hands and the quiet dignity of a man who knew he was present for something worth being present for. Bon Holloway came. She had not expected that. He stood at the back and left immediately after and did not say anything, but he had come, and she knew what it meant. Margaret Hale did not come. Clara had not expected her to, and held no grudge about the absence. Margaret Hale had made her choices and would live with them, and Clara had spent enough of her life carrying other people's decisions as weight on herself to have learned to put them down. The new Blackwater Creek Bridge was completed the following spring. It was a proper bridge engineered and built with materials that would last, replacing the old timber crossing that had collapsed on a stormy night in the summer of 1884, and set 2 people on a path that neither of them had been looking for, and both of them had needed. The county held a small ceremony. Nathan stood beside Clara, while the county recorder said the appropriate words about infrastructure and progress and community, and the people of Burnt Creek gathered around the new crossing and talked about what the improved route would mean for supply times and winter travel. Nobody from the county recorder's office mentioned what had happened on this road the night the old bridge fell. Nobody connected the ceremony to the hearing that had taken place 8 months earlier, or to the documents, or to Henry Whitmore's name finally sitting correctly in the county archive. But Ben Holloway, standing near the back of the gathering, the way he always stood near the back of things, caught Clara's eye across the crowd. He tipped his hat. She nodded back. That was enough. On the ride home with the afternoon, long and clear around them, and the ranch visible in the distance, Nathan said, "How does it feel?" Clara thought about it honestly the way she thought about everything. She thought about a night in the rain with a horse she'd stopped and a stranger she'd saved, and no knowledge of what any of it would mean. She thought about route documents and supply ledgers, and a certified copy she'd ridden 20 miles before breakfast to obtain. She thought about standing up in a room of 83 people and saying her father's name out loud in a voice that did not apologize for existing. She thought about a letter from a dying man who had tried too late and too quietly to be better than his fear. She thought about a secondary filing kept in a coat for 8 years by a man who had been waiting for the right person to give it to. She thought about taking a hand on a rise above her father's land and feeling for the first time in her life like the ground under her was entirely her own. "It feels like something that was broken for a long time," she said, "has been set correctly." Nathan rode beside her and did not say anything because she had said it right, and adding to it would have been unnecessary. Clara Whitmore. Clara Caldwell. Now, though she used both names and always would, because the Whitmore name was her father's, and she was not finished carrying it, rode home through the Montana afternoon with the particular steadiness of a woman who had stopped running from the size of the things she deserved, and had started simply living inside them instead. She had stood in the road her whole life for other people. She had learned finally to stand in it for herself, and the ground held her exactly as well as it had always held everyone else, because it always had, and it always would. And she had simply at last stopped being surprised by that. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be told they are allowed to take up space. Clara Whitmore learned that she had never needed permission. She had only needed to stop